I think it's quite interesting listening to you, because I'm also surprised as Hamza is, because you've had over a week to sort of come with
10 days.
argument. Yeah, 10 days. And one of the things you said already was that there's a typo, and you use the word typo in the New Testament, and you gave an explanation for why the Son.
Not in the New Testament, in the story in the Old Testament. Not in
It's still the Bible, right?
Sure.
Just to be clear.
Okay, so that's fine. So
that's fine.
1 Samuel. So then that's one thing that you've already said. So the typo is a modern way of saying a mistake. Yeah, when you make a typo, you make a mistake, which is. I'm glad that you sort of said that. Now, you're talking about the story of the fig tree, and it's a very straightforward story in that we're given exactly even the motivations behind why it happens. It clearly says that Jesus was feeling hungry, and he saw a fig tree in the distance, and it says he went to find out if it had any fruit, which is interesting. Which means he, again, being someone who believes that Jesus is God on earth. This shows again a not knowing, a lack of knowledge. So he went to check to see if there was any fruit there, and there wasn't any fruit there. And then the cursing happens, and as I'm just saying, it was sort of an angry reaction, and the disciples the next day were sniggering, and they were going past the same tree. Now the explanation you've given is to say, and I'm glad you said it, that this has to be looked in a spiritual way. It's not a historical text. That's what you're saying.
And
okay,
that's why
really
I gave
the
you
point.
Yeah.
So let me just finish the point. So that's really the point that we've been making. Yeah. That it's fine to look at the Gospels as your spiritual text that you derive your faith from, but when it's analysed historically, it doesn't match in terms of providing evidence and being something that you can rely on historically. So I think that you've sort of really made the points that we wanted. Do you have anything that you want to add to it at all?
Not really. That's why I highlighted 5 points that you need to look at when you read the Bible.
Sure.
Yeah,
so you say about 5 generalized.
These 5 points. Okay, these 5 points are important because when you have a text, the intention of the text of the Bible is primarily a spiritual intention. Now, historically, you can find some historical events. If you read the Bible, let's say you read the text, which is a metaphor, talking about prophecy, and then you look at this as an historian of the 21st century Britain, you're not going to get anything from it. Okay, so you need to look at in the context of the 21st century Israel. Okay, and you need to know that this is a spiritual book. So the way Jesus is behaving is
so it's not a history book.
The Bible has never been an history book.
Then we agree with you, Raphael. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you,
yes.
Thank you, Raphael.
Okay.
Good yarn.
So he spent 10 days to tell us what we said a week ago.
He spent 10 days to read the parable about the fig. So not even the parable, the story of the fig tree, and then ask me, "What's your point?"
That caught me by surprise. The look on your face when he said that was like,
but you know what's
asking me to
But you know what's so ironic, though, Ijaz? Honestly, right? You could see he was creeping into the other Gospels to try and add this spiritual parable stuff, right? Yes. And then he was trying to say about after the fig tree, he went to the temple. But ironically, when he in the Gospel of Matthew, he does the temple first before the fig tree. It's the other way around.
I think it's really fascinating how quickly this is not a history book was thrown out there.
So quickly, I got shocked.
Absolutely, because really what we've been told is manuscripts, eyewitnesses, historically reliable, and that's thrown out as day in, day out. And what's happened is the manuscripts they're not early.
Yeah,
these aren't eyewitnesses. These aren't eyewitnesses, and it's actually not really a history book. It's a shame, really, because it's sort of. I'd really like somebody else apart from Raphael, with due respect, to come and maybe voice to that or correct us if we're wrong. I mean, we really want to know.
Well, what I'm beginning to realize is that we may not need to get to the other Gospels if they all declare and no, it's not a history book, and we might not need to finish this series. You can call it a day and chill out at home while this pandemic happens.
We've not even scratched the surface on this, man. Mark was the easiest one. It's like, wait, Matthew is the one that's going to rip the whole thing apart.
Listen,
that's the one where we're going to go into the Old Testament and look at the prophecies and all this stuff. This is like child's play, Mark.
Right. How are you guys doing? It's been so long.
There's an echo.
Oh, there's a bit of an echo. Let me try to turn this down. Can you hear me now better?
Welcome to make your point about the Gospel of Mark.
Catholic.
Yeah, oh, sorry. There's an echo because I think I have. Yeah, now it's better. Right.
I can hear you perfectly.
Sorry?
I can hear you perfectly. I don't
You're
hear
clear,
it.
yeah.
Okay, that's great.
You're all good.
So Jordan, this time I won't take over the show, okay?
Did you last time? I didn't know.
No, I joked about it.
I didn't know it.
I know Hamza was irritated with me, but you know. So either way, the thing is that I would.
Why they're sniping at you, Hamza? What's going on? I think that smile is the problem, Hamza.
I'm just Hamza's normal voice.
You know me, I'm a first impressions kind of guy. Yeah, when you walk into the room, I'm going to listen to the first thing you say.
Okay.
Yeah, not really Muslim of you. Now the thing is, right?
Not very nice
Really?
of you to say that.
Don't use my intellect.
I'm joking. So the thing is, right, about the Gospel of Mark and the history, I do think that really it comes down to, you know, unfairness from your side. And I don't mean intentional unfairness, of course. I mean unfairness in assessing what historicity means, right? So, for example, all of us would have no problem accepting that the Gospel of Mark was written in Greek. It could have been written in English. It could have been written in Esperanto, but it was simply written at the most known language of its time, which happens to be Greek, right? In the same sense, I would argue that the Gospel of Mark was written in the best known genre of its time, right? Which was Greco-Roman biography history. And of course, Greco-Roman history is not history by our state. It's not the 21st century vision of history. I hope I'm not on camera because, right? So the thing is, this is what I do believe you guys are kind of treating unfairly. Now, again, granted, I'm not an expert. Yes.
Yeah, well, we know.
Yeah. So what would you like to say about that? Yeah, I'll mute myself.
But did you come on to respond to the points that we made, or did you come on to pontificate?
Actually, I think that's really an interesting point that you've made, Catholic, so Canadian Catholic, because what you're saying is that this is a genre from so a biography that was written as the Hellenistic or the Greco-Romans would have written it. So it's basically, as Brother Ijaz was saying in his debate, I don't know if you managed to catch that there is a framework on how stories are developed and made, and so this is telling a narrative as opposed to telling a history. So the story has to fit.
I would argue, right? Sorry, I would argue, right, that we have to take everything in context to the point that, for example, we have to understand that there is narrative points in there, of course, but that's one way something is communicated, right? So, for example, there could be, you know, slight rearrangement of material. I mean, again, just approaching it really, this is basically what I believe you guys are taking being slightly unfair of. Now, of course, you don't think you're doing this on purpose. You might be really willing to. Perhaps you're also committing a fallacy, for example, approaching the Bible like the Quran, right? Because I've heard that a lot of Muslims, I've actually seen that a lot of Muslims have a different relation to the Quran than most Christians would have to the Bible. So how would you address that, right? This idea that you are being unfair in the way you approach, right?
What's the unfairness?
Canadian Catholic.
Yes.
Did you watch the first video?
I did.
Do you know what you're responding to?
Do I know what I'm responding to?
Yes, and we said that you thought was wrong.
Well, I don't believe that what you said is wrong. I believe that you're being slightly unfair in the way you assess the gospel.
So all we're doing is looking at the Gospel of Mark as a historical claim.
Right, that's the problem, right? What I'm saying is when you say historical claim, you're not looking at it as a historical claim of Greco-Roman biography. You're looking at it as a Washington Post history claim. And
no, I'm looking at it as a, no. I'm looking at it.
Right.
See, did this happen in history?
Right, and what I'm trying to explain to you is that modern view of history, which is that it is strictly of whether it did happen or didn't happen, is
that's not the modern view of history at all.
Right, I'm talking. So it's not Greco-Roman biography. Like, for example, I'm going to give an example.
It's not a biography. It is a biography.
No, Greco-Roman biography, which is a different genre than the 21st century biography, right?
So Canadian Catholic, can you just give me one moment?
Yeah.
So I just want to clarify because I think actually you're agreeing with us. Okay.
Yes.
And let me tell you why I think this. So what we've been saying from the beginning, what Brother Ijaz and Brother Hamza has presented, is that this is not because Christians often, when they're speaking to Muslims, will say this is a historical text. It tells you historical facts, and you have to take them historically at face value, because they're written in there and they're eyewitnesses, etc., etc., etc. This painted across as something that's historically reliable, therefore you should rely on it. And what we've done over this time, we've looked at sort of some of the manuscript timings. We've looked at some of the historicity of the events that were within, and we've shown and demonstrated that they're untenable as historical facts. And what you seem to be saying is sort of, I think, building on what we're saying already, is that this is a story written in the genre of Greco-Roman biographies. It's not necessarily historical as we understand history today. Right. And I think if you're saying that, and you could tell me if I'm saying that, if you're saying that this is not history as we understand it, then we're in agreement. We're not in disagreement at all. We are saying this is a narrative and it's not history.
Right, but the thing is, where I would say the unfairness lies is when you say it's not history, right? That would imply that there was no written history before that either. Because if you, for example, were to take Plutarch, right, and open up his writings, and he's known as the father of modern history, right? You would have to completely
modern history. Interesting term.
Right, I'm talking, right. The thing is, sorry, I didn't mean it in a rude way. Sorry, I didn't mean it in a rude way. Ijaz is the nice one. I should be rude to Hamza.
Imran is the nice one.
You can try to be rude to me, mate. No worries.
I'm joking, Hamza. So
good luck with that.
Right. So the thing is, nobody would take Plutarch, and I understand you're interested in Gospels, and would say, here is Plutarch. He wrote an entire volume on the life of Romulus, and now we know Romulus didn't exist, and therefore everything he wrote is unreliable. Like, Hamza wouldn't take that approach. He wouldn't say that we have no knowledge of anything in Egyptian history just because Herodotus is not reliable to the modern sense.
I think you've misunderstood our position, mate.
Yeah.
We're not saying it's not historical. We're questioning why you claim it's historical.
It is historical.
Neutral position.
Well, yes, I understand you say take a neutral position. What my point is that you are creating a false dichotomy. You're creating a dichotomy in which it's either historically reliable in the modern sense or it's not reliable.
So
I would argue.
I've let you speak for like a little bit to like explain what you said.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you right now that in the field of historiography, there is a subfield known as narratology. Last night, I spoke at length about this. What we have done is ask the exact same questions that historical scholars ask for any work in antiquity. You look for plausibility, explanatory scope, explanatory power, all of these things. I think I spoke less ad hoc components, for example. So I've been through these criteria, which scholars use to judge what the New Testament and the life of Jesus in terms of being historical or not. So when you come and you say to us, you are using modern standards by modern scholars, no, we're using what everyone in the field that studies historiography does in the first place. Is there one of the 5 criteria I've just mentioned? Or 4 of them, I think. Of the 4 or 5 I've mentioned, which one of those is modern and wrong and we should not use?
No, you're not understanding. I agree with you on a lot of things, right? But I think there's a problem. What we disagree on. The thing is, let me give a scenario. Maybe I'm addressing the wrong person because it's Hamza who said this, but the thing is, the Gospel of Mark can correctly relay Jesus' ministry age. It can relay the bulk correctly, while also having narrative elements. And I don't understand why it either has to be historical.
We didn't say that we did not say that the New Testament cannot have narrative elements. But when you say it speaks of the historical, it makes a historical claim about something which existed in history, we are able to remove the narrative aspect and look at the claim itself. So Jesus walked into Jerusalem, for example. I don't need to know that Jesus walked into Jerusalem. I just need to know where Jerusalem is to know that he walked into it. So there are ways that we can approach the text. So if you're telling me that you and I agree on this point, then what have you come on to respond to us about then?
Well, this is the question that I want to ask. What do we have, right? I would argue, right, is more. Yes, I am a Christian, Jordan. Yeah. So I would argue, what is a more reliable? What do we have that's better in presenting history of perfect. I guess that's probably the point of contention.
So that's
right?
can I just very quickly, Canadian Catholic. So I'm really fascinated because what you've said is really eye-opening. You said that this is the Mark is a genre of Greco-Roman biography. It's not history as we know it. It contains a narrative, which is the main thing. It may have truth in it as well. You've sort of said that, but then you've said, well, we haven't got anything better. Now, that for me, this is really, I think that's a telling admission. You're saying that we accept, or we will take the Gospel of Mark as it is because we don't have anything better. And what we're saying is, what we've said right from the beginning is, because our manuscript evidence stops at a certain time, 300-400 years after Jesus, we can't really go back earlier than this, that we don't know if we have the narrative, even the story we don't know if we have. And later on we come to compare to the other Gospels, we're going to find that inter-gospel discrepancies of the same narrative. And so really what you're saying is that we have no choice as Christians but to take whatever evidence we happen to have, even though it's not history necessarily, but a Greco-Roman biography, which is a narrative story in the genre of the time. So this is like if I were to write a biography now based upon the things that I understand to have happened because of the context that I'm in. If you were to find that in 400 years' time, you would say that we have to take this as being accurate because we have nothing else to say, even though you know it's a story that I've written based upon the genre of whatever I'm writing at the time. So really, I think you're taking away from the power of the Gospel of Mark, if anything. And for me, as somebody who would say that I try to look for evidence when I believe things to a certain, to a large extent, this would take away for me, it'd be a reason not to accept this story. So I think really you've really agreed with us completely.
I would disagree with the first thing you said. I don't believe that parts that are non-historical are not true, right? Because truth can be presented in multiple ways. A parable can be true and it might not be historical. That's one. Secondly, of course, I would say that I do not see a problem with saying that parts of, for example, the Gospel of Mark we might never establish. One, either if they were historical. Second, if they, for example, what
would
order.
It matter to you?
That wouldn't still disprove what we can.
No, but does it matter to you?
It matters to me. Whatever God reveals is important.
No, forget your theology. Does it matter if the things written about in Mark didn't really happen?
Well, it is important in establishing that it's historical in a modern sense, but that would still make it true because it would have a true point, right? Theological point.
No, forget the theology. I'm saying if the things written about in Mark didn't happen in history, would you have a problem with that?
I would, but of course it would depend on which part, right?
So you would have a problem with that?
Yes, I would.
You just said that, but you just admitted that some of the things written there might not have happened. Well, so really, you do have a problem with the Gospel of Mark as an historical reference. You have to.
Well, of course, in general. What do you mean when we're talking about what did or didn't happen? We're talking about parts, right? None of us believes here that when Mark claims that Jesus existed, it didn't happen. So there's one thing that did happen. Well, Jesus was, crucified. Okay, you guys don't accept that, but most do. Perhaps something else, right? So there's a large chunk that we.
Okay, talk to me about the fig tree. Did that happen?
I don't believe that the fig tree. Well, actually, I don't know if there's a way to know, right? It could
no. I don't understand. Did the story of Jesus going to the fig tree and cursing it because there was no fruit on it, because he was hungry and such, do you believe that happened in history?
Well, I don't know if there is a way to know that, right?
Huh?
See, that admission, I think, Hamza,
you don't know.
Yeah, he said actually even worse than that, Hamza. He said he doesn't think there's a way to know.
There's a way to know. Wow.
So I think
that's fair enough. We agree with you, mate.
Canadian Catholic, I think we should invite you to be a part of the panel from now on.
I'm so sorry. I need to kind of respect to Brother Hamza. I have no problem with this agreeing on this point, but I don't understand how we draw the conclusion that there's one episode. And the episode is still. Let me finish, Brother Hamza. Well, Mr. Hamza. So the thing is, I called him a brother. But
you are on our side.
You're on our side. Just
repeat after
we
me.
no name is going to be on his video.
Okay.
Brother Canadian Muslim.
Okay, so now I'll have to change my name. But the thing is, right?
Inshallah.
Call yourself Robert.
Let's agree, for example, we both agreed that there is no way for us to know whether the fig tree story did happen, right? And we might agree on this, but let's first say from my side, I can, from either point, draw a narrative from it, right? The first importance is, of course, from the theological point, right, is the story, of, for example, how Jesus illustrates parable about the Jews, right? They were like fig trees that were dry, and their time was drying up. That is one parable that many see. Now, another point is, why would one story whose historicity we might not be able to ascertain undermine other parts which we can? This is what I don't understand. Why does there
a theological question? Do you believe the Gospel of Mark is the word of God?
I do believe, yeah, it's a revelation from God. I would say that I believe in the same sense you do, that every word was spoken. I do believe it is inspired.
How do you understand it then? Just because you're telling me in one hand the things that happened there may not have happened, and yet it's the word of God. I'm just trying to marry the two up.
Why is there a contradiction between the two? Can't God reveal a poem that didn't actually happen?
Can God reveal something that didn't happen?
Yes, he can for other theological reasons. There are parables, narratives, proverbs. I just don't see why it has to be, right, that even something occurred in history, or we can't draw examples from it. One can have a huge point in it. Okay. Right. Now, the second point is, before you respond, the second point, I want you to remember.
Point. Oh, come on, man.
Yeah, I know you're old. You can't remember two things. But the thing is...
Well, no, go on. Give us your second point.
Yeah, I was just joking. The second point is, just because we might not be able to ascertain, for example, the actual historicity of one event, why does that undermine events whose
we didn't give individual atomized incidents. We actually gave a wide array of examples in the stream. That's why the second stream was meant for people like yourself to come on and respond to not just one example, but as many as they wanted to. So you don't have to give you don't have to, you can freely admit and say, you know what, the one thing I don't know about, let me give you one where I think it did happen and we can work from there. We can provide you with that freedom to do that. So why don't you try that? Is there a particular contradiction that we raised, other than the victory one, which by admission you don't know much about, or you're not certain about its historicity? Is there something you think is historical that we mentioned in the previous stream that you want to reply to?
Well, I wouldn't say that there was any specific one that, I would accept. See, Brother Nizam hasn't been speaking much, so I would have no problem with him asking. The thing is, I was coming on to object more generally, but sure, if there is any specific one that you would think is the best one, I would listen to. I did want to respond to the fig tree one, but I think I made my point, right?
The only point you've made so far, I'll be honest with you, my brother, is you've accepted that what's written in the Gospel of Mark may not be historical, and we're with you.